Garden centers love you. They love you because you come back every single spring and buy the same annual flowers that die every single fall. That cycle keeps their registers ringing, season after season, year after year. But what nobody at the garden center is going to tell you is that 11 perennial plants exist that spread so fast, you only need to buy them once. One daylily clump can be split into 3 or 4 new plants every few years with nothing but a shovel. A few creeping phlox plants will spread across an entire slope on their own, and you'll never need to replace any of them. 3 years ago, an average flat of annual petunias cost about $8. That same flat dies the moment the first frost rolls through your neighborhood. You buy it again next April, and the April after that. Over 5 years, that single flat spot in your garden costs you $40 in petunias alone. Now multiply that across a whole front yard, 4 or 5 beds, hanging baskets, window boxes, and the numbers get genuinely painful. A quart-sized perennial runs about $5 to $7 at an independent nursery. You buy it once. It comes back every single year. It spreads into the empty spaces around it. You divide it with a shovel. You hand divisions to your neighbor across the fence. And that garden center never sees your money again. That is the real reason you don't hear about these plants in the spring promotional flyers. Repeat customers are the business model. Perennials break that model. So today you get the full list they'd rather you not have. Number 11. Black-eyed Susan. Rudbeckia is one of the most forgiving plants you will ever put in the ground. It thrives in zones 3 through 9, handles full sun and partial shade, tolerates poor soil, and laughs at drought once its roots are established. A single plant self-seeds so aggressively that you will have dozens of new plants popping up by the second summer without lifting a finger. The golden yellow blooms show up in mid-summer and keep going well into fall, right when everything else in the garden starts looking tired and brown. They grow 2 to 3 feet tall, which makes them perfect for the middle or back of a border. And because black-eyed Susans are native to North America, they feed native pollinators that your imported annuals cannot support. Bees and beneficial insects treat them like a buffet. The budget trick with Rudbeckia is simple. Let the seed heads stand through winter. Birds love feeding on them, and the seeds that drop to the ground will germinate on their own come spring. You will go from 3 plants to 30 in 2 growing seasons. If you want to control where they pop up, just pull the seedlings you don't want and transplant them somewhere else. Free plants, no nursery trip, no potting soil, no special equipment. Number 10. Creeping phlox. If you have a slope, a rock wall, or an ugly patch of bare ground that nothing seems to cover, creeping phlox is your answer. It grows in zones 3 through 9, stays low at about 6 inches tall, and spreads into a thick carpet of pink, purple, white, or lavender blooms every spring. The cascade effect over a stone wall is one of the prettiest things you can create in a garden, and it costs almost nothing once you have the first few plants in the ground. One plant covers roughly a 2-foot circle within 2 years. Plant 3 or 4 of them 18 inches apart, and by year 3 you have a solid mat of color that chokes out weeds better than any mulch you can buy. The foliage stays green even after the flowers fade, so you get year-round ground cover from a plant that cost you $6. Creeping phlox roots wherever its stems touch soil. You can speed the process by pinning a few stems down with landscape staples and covering them with a thin layer of dirt. Once rooted, cut the stem from the mother plant, dig up the new start, and transplant it anywhere you want. You just made a free plant in about 6 weeks. Do this 3 or 4 times a season, and you can fill an entire hillside in a year without spending another cent. Number 9. Daylilies. Every experienced gardener has a daylily story, and it usually sounds something like this. 3. Now I have 50. Daylilies multiply through underground fans that push outward from the original clump every single growing season. In zones 3 through 10, they handle heat, cold, humidity, and drought without complaining. They are genuinely one of the hardest plants to kill. The variety is staggering. You can find daylilies in yellow, orange, red, pink, purple, and nearly black. Bloom heights range from 12 inches to 4 feet depending on the cultivar. Some bloom in early summer, some in midsummer, some rebloom clear into September. Plant 3 different varieties with staggered bloom times, and you can have daylily color from June through the first frost. Divide daylily clumps every 3 to 4 years by digging up the whole clump and pulling or cutting it into sections. Each section with a few fans and some attached roots becomes a fully independent new plant. One original $5 daylily clump can yield 4 to 6 new plants every time you divide. That math compounds. By year 6, your 3 original daylilies could be 20 or more plants scattered across your entire yard, and you never went back to the garden center for a single one of them. Number 8. Bee balm. Bee balm spreads by underground stolons, which is a polite way of saying it runs. In zones 3 through 9, a single bee balm plant can double or triple its footprint in a single growing season. The tubular flowers come in red, pink, purple, and white, and they are magnets for hummingbirds and butterflies. If you want to attract hummingbirds to your yard without buying and refilling a feeder every week, bee balm does the job for free. Plant bee balm where you want a bold, fast-filling display and where you have room for it to wander. The stems grow 2 to 4 feet tall, and the flowers bloom from midsummer into early fall. The leaves smell like oregano when you brush against them, which is a nice bonus for a plant that takes care of itself. The one thing to watch with bee balm is powdery mildew. Give it decent air circulation by not crowding it against a fence or wall, and it stays healthy. If the clump gets too thick after a couple of years, dig out sections from the center and replant them at the edges or hand them to a neighbor. Every chunk you remove becomes another free bee balm start. And somehow the plant grows back thicker than before. Number 7. Hostas. Shade gardeners, this one is yours. Hostas grow in zones 3 through 9, prefer partial to full shade, and multiply steadily by forming larger and larger clumps year after year. The foliage comes in blue, green, gold, and variegated combinations that look expensive and sophisticated without any effort on your part. They make shady spots under trees look intentional instead of neglected. A mature hosta clump can be divided every 4 to 5 years. Dig it up in early spring or early fall, slice it into sections with a sharp spade and replant each section. A single large hosta can produce 6 to 8 divisions, and each one grows into a full-sized plant within 2 seasons. That is around $50 worth of nursery plants from one original purchase. Hostas are slug targets, which is the one real downside. Crushed eggshells around the base or a shallow dish of beer set into the ground nearby handles the problem without chemicals. Skip the commercial slug pellets. They cost money every season, and the eggshells from your breakfast work just as well. Copper tape around pots also keeps slugs away from container hostas, and a roll of it lasts for years. Number 6. Yarrow. Yarrow is the plant that refuses to quit. It grows in zones 3 through 9, tolerates the worst soil you can throw at it, laughs at drought, and spreads through both underground runners and self-seeding. The flat-topped flower clusters come in white, yellow, pink, and red, blooming from early summer well into fall. Cut flowers for a vase and more blooms replace them within a week or two. A single yarrow plant can spread 2 to 3 feet in a single growing season through its underground rhizomes. Divide the clumps every 2 to 3 years to keep them vigorous and to generate free plants for other spots in your yard. Each division takes about 30 seconds with a garden fork. Stick the fork under the edge, pop out a chunk, and plant it wherever you want color. Yarrow is also one of the best companion plants in a vegetable garden. It attracts beneficial insects like ladybugs and lacewings that eat aphids, so planting a border of yarrow around your tomato beds means fewer pests without spending a dime on chemical pesticides. Your vegetable garden gets free pest control and a pretty border at the same time. If you are finding this useful, go ahead and subscribe. I cover budget gardening tips like this every week. Number 5. Coneflower. Echinacea is native to eastern and central North America, and it grows like it owns the place. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, coneflowers tolerate heat, drought, poor soil, and humidity. They grow 2 to 4 feet tall with distinctive purple, pink, white, or yellow daisy-like blooms that last from midsummer through fall. According to Clemson University's Home and Garden Information Center, coneflowers spread through both self-seeding and slowly expanding root clumps. Leave the seed heads standing through winter, and you will have new seedlings popping up in spring. A single plant can multiply into a bold, blooming colony within 3 to 4 growing seasons. The medicinal angle is a bonus. Echinacea has been used in herbal teas and supplements for decades. You can dry the petals and roots yourself at home. So you're growing a beautiful, spreading, pollinator-friendly plant that also has a second use in your kitchen. Try getting that kind of value from a flat of impatiens. Number 4. Catmint. Catmint is the plant that makes people think you hired a professional landscaper. It grows in zones 3 through 8, forms neat mounds of gray-green foliage, and produces spikes of lavender-blue flowers that bloom from late spring through fall if you shear it back after the first flush fades. One mature catmint plant spreads roughly 2 to 3 feet wide, creating a soft, billowy mass of color that photographs beautifully. The spreading happens both from the expanding base of the plant and from self-seeding around the drip line. You can divide catmint clumps every 3 to 4 years, and each division establishes quickly in its new spot. Line a walkway or front path with catmint, and within 2 years you have a professional-looking border that cost you less than $20 total. Catmint is also deer-resistant and drought-tolerant, which means it survives the two biggest plant killers in suburban yards without any intervention from you. No fencing, no extra watering once established, and no replacement purchases at the garden center next spring. That is the definition of a budget plant. Number 3. Shasta Daisy. Shasta Daisy spread through both self-seeding and expanding root clumps, which means they multiply on two fronts at once. In zones 4 through 9, they send up cheerful white blooms with bright yellow centers from early summer into fall, growing 1 to 3 feet tall depending on the variety you choose. Divide Shasta Daisy clumps every 2 to 3 years to keep them vigorous. If you skip division, the center of the clump dies out and the plant starts looking ragged. But if you divide on schedule, each original plant produces 4 to 6 new divisions that you can spread across your garden or trade with neighbors at a plant swap. Shasta daisies look fantastic when mass planted along a fence line or property boundary. A row of 20 plants turns an ordinary yard into something that looks like a cottage garden photograph. And when those 20 plants started as purchased plants and 15 free divisions, the cost per foot of garden border drops to almost nothing. That is money the garden center will never see. Number 2. Lamb's Ear. Lamb's ear spreads by runners and self-seeding, covering ground quickly with thick mats of soft silvery foliage that looks like it belongs in a designer garden. In zones 4 through 8, it handles full sun to light shade and tolerates poor soil and drought once its roots are set. It is one of the toughest, most forgiving ground covers you can plant. The leaves feel like velvet. Grandchildren love touching them, and the silvery texture adds visual and tactile interest to borders and pathways. Lamb's ear grows 6 to 12 inches tall and spreads outward steadily, filling gaps between taller perennials and smothering weeds in the process. Anywhere you have bare dirt between plants, lamb's ear will fill it. Divide lamb's ear clumps every 2 to 3 years by pulling apart sections from the edges. Each section roots quickly in a new location with almost no attention. If you don't want the flower stalks, which can look a bit lanky and floppy, just snip them off at the base. The foliage is the real star, and it stays attractive from spring through the first hard freeze. Silver foliage also pairs with almost any flower color, so you can tuck lamb's ear into any bed and it works. Number 1. Sedum. Sedum is the plant that makes the entire budget gardening philosophy click into place. It grows in zones 3 through 9, tolerates full sun, drought, poor soil, rocky conditions, and flat-out neglect. Ground cover varieties like Dragon's Blood or Angelina spread fast across bare soil, rock gardens, and container edges. Taller upright varieties like Autumn Joy form dense clumps that divide easily with a sharp spade. Ground cover sedums root at every single leaf node that touches soil. Break off a 3-inch stem, lay it on bare dirt, keep it lightly moist for a week, and it roots itself. You can propagate dozens of new plants from a single $4 pot in one afternoon. You don't need rooting hormone, a greenhouse, or any special tools. Just snap off a piece, drop it where you want a new plant, and water it once or twice. The fall-blooming varieties attract late-season pollinators at a time when very little else in the garden is still flowering. Autumn Joy starts with green buds in summer, opens to dusty pink in early fall, then deepens to copper and finally russet brown through winter. It gives you 4 seasons of visual interest from a plant you bought once and never need to replace. And if that is not the perfect example of what a budget garden should be, nothing is. And that is the complete list. 11 plants that grow, spread, divide, and fill your garden without asking you to open your wallet a second time. Every dollar you spend on one of these perennials is a dollar your garden pays back year after year. Every dollar you spend on annuals is a dollar the garden center collects from you again next spring. How many springs of replanting annuals does it take before the math becomes obvious? For some gardeners, the answer is one look at this list. If you want more ways to cut the waste out of your garden budget, there is plenty more like this on the channel.